Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the session 4 for Anniversary Jams. And today's session, we'll see how to we learn about data persistence. So till now, we learned how to take input from the user. We learned how to display a list, maybe if using Recycler View. But to make an app that has some functioning of its own, we'll have to learn how to store that data. So we'll start by learning storing the data locally. So data persistence, to understand in very very simple terms, you can say that storing that data locally for with your within your app data. So a lot of Android Jetpack libraries we use today, we're going to use the Room library for this. Um, the slides. So Room library is a persistence library that provides an abstraction layer. So by abstraction layer, we mean that we are accessing the SQLite database, but we don't have to write the complete queries the way we have to write while accessing the database directly. So that abstraction layers gives you a fluent access to the database, and there are multiple advantages like compile time verification and less boilerplate code. That means like the set standard code that's repeated every time. You don't have to write much of that, and you can of course easily integrate it with the architecture component like your view models and things like that. Um, and so we'll see the main components for the Room database, which is the entity, the data access object, and the database. We'll see each definition one by one. So the entity is like the data class that is defined. So suppose we are like today we are going to make an inventory management app, uh, which will be storing suppose like you have an inventory, you store goods and products. So one product would be an entity, and that would be a table in the database. So each table using this annotation, each data class using this annotation becomes a table in our database, and the columns correspond to the fields, suppose the price of the product and the number of products. Then comes the data access object. So the data access object kind of acts like the bridge between your view models in the database. It's responsible for defining the methods that access the database, and this is where the queries for accessing the SQL database are written. Then finally, the annotation database like defines the database holder. This the main access point, like it serves as the main access point for underlying connection with the app's data. So seeing the final structure of the entire the way room library works, the data access object acting as like a bridge between the Room database and the rest of the app, and the entities are the data classes or the tables defined in the database. So today we'll be making an inventory management app. We have shared the link in the slides, and we'll be sharing it with you in the comments. So it will be a simple app just to add a product, change the number product, and access the details of the inventory in the recycler view. So we have provided the link. You can see the solution code, but please try to code along with the demonstration. My friend Aryan will take over now and show the demonstration. Please try to code along with the demonstration, and this will be corresponding to the unit 5 of your course, Android Basics in Kotlin course. So let's start with the coding now.
Thanks, Vaishnavi, for the introduction. Um, so I have the Room documentation open right here. Everything from the setup usage is all mentioned here. And I have the starter version of the app ready. So let's just go through the documentation and we can start implementing things one by one. I have the UI and everything set up. So you can see the main activity. You have a recycler view to display the list of all the inventory items. And you have the add item screen where you can type the name, category, quantity to add the item. And you can also update the quantity by tapping on the minus or plus buttons and by long pressing the row, you'll be able to delete the item. So, um, okay, we'll hop into the documentation. First thing you have to do is you have to set it up, which is add all the dependencies to your Gradle file. As you can see, I have you have to add this and this dependency. These are the regular two ones that you need. And as you can see, I've added them here. And second, this is optional, but I since we're using Kotlin and we want to leverage all its benefits, we want to add like Kotlin extensions, which can make it like easier for us to code. And like it provides helper extension functions, etc., which are specific to Kotlin. So these are the two. So these two, and this is what we're going to be using. Since we're not using Rx, Java, or Guava or testing or anything, we do not need to include any of these. So I have the main three ones set up here. Now, as Vaishnavi explained, there are three major components: the database class, database entities, and the DAOs. The data entity, I have it set up here, but we still need to make it compatible with Room. So that's what we'll come to in the next section. So we have a sample implementation here uh, where you can see that all the annotations and everything are like specified. So right now my data class is pretty bare bones. I just have three since we're storing the name, category, and quantity. Um, yeah, so let's go to this section. So first thing we need to do is we need to annotate a room entity using the entity annotation. So I'll do that first. And uh, since everything else is defined, we can still leave it. But one thing that we need is we need a primary key. So for example, if this is your database, data is generally stored as like a table in Room. So you'll have columns and rows that represent the data. So in our case, we have name, category, quantity. So I can give name, category, quantity. So if I want to add one item, I can put, let's say, bottle, and let's say utilities 3. So if I want to add another item, then I just have to type it here. Or we can just say wire utilities and 2. So as we keep adding items, Room will keep adding each row one by one to store data. Uh, but one thing is, we cannot uniquely identify uh, one row without uh, by just the name, or we'll need something specific that will actually make it easier for you to uniquely identify the row. So for that, we have a primary key. So now I can give like an index, for example. So now if I know that if you talk about primary key 1, then I always know that it's referring to this row. So for that, Room also has something built in with the at primary key annotation, and it'll be an integer. So you can just copy paste that here and import the dependency. So now we have a primary key, name, category, and quantity. Uh, we can also specify a table name if we want to, or the column name for like any of the items if we want to. Uh, for demonstration's sake, I'll do it, but it's not necessary. So if I want to name the table something, then when I'm annotating it with entity, I can pass the table name. So in parentheses, I'll open parentheses, table name, and I can just call it inventory. Uh, Second thing is column info. If I want to name it a specific column in the database, then I can annotate it using @column info, and then in one of the parameters, I can pass the name. So I can pass, I'll just keep it name for now. And I can do the same thing for category. So now I have column names also set up. Now we don't have to worry about all of these. This is for more like advanced use cases, like having multiple primary keys or anything of that sort. So since we're going pretty basic, this will be more than enough. Uh, Now we're done defining the data using entities. Now what we need to do is we need to create a database access object to be able to access the data. So for a database access object, we basically declare it as an interface, which means that we are not providing the like we're just defining that the function takes these parameters and returns this, but we're not giving it any body or telling it like what's going like we're not giving any implementation from our sides. This is actually done by Room automatically. So we just need to explain what we want, and Room handles the rest for us. So in our case, we need to be able to add an item, delete an item, view all the items, and update an item's quantity. So for that, uh, I'll create a new interface. Go to new Java, Kotlin class file, interface, and I'll just call it inventory database access object. So now I have like a blank interface set up. The first thing I need to do is, as we did with at entities, even for DAO, we need to annotate it. So I'll just annotate it with at DAO. Now this tells the Room compiler that this is a database access object. Uh, so we'll start with the first one. We'll start with insert. So as you can see, we just need to give the insert annotation and just pass who all we want to insert. Room handles the rest for us. So you can just start with insert and then define a function. Function insert. I'll just call it insert for now, and we'll just name it item inventory item. So that's it for inserting. Then we need to be able to view. Uh, we need to be able to view all the inventory items. So for that, Room has another annotation called at query. So whenever we're querying an SQL database, uh, we since we're using since Room uses SQLite behind the hood, it uses SQL to interact with the database. So any commands issued follow the SQL syntax. Uh, for us, in our case, we just want to fetch all the entries in the database. So for that, and all of these are executed using queries. So uh, in at queries, we need to pass what the SQL command would be. And uh, this table is called, we named it on top over here. We named it inventory. So that's the table name. And uh, so what we need to do is we need to get all the inventory items from inventory. So the way we say that in SQL is select all, the star represents all. So select all entries from and the table name, which is inventory. And this will just give us a list of inventory items. So I can just tell Room that this function gets returns a list of inventory items, and Room will automatically do the rest for us. The next thing that's left is we need to delete. So for that, again, room provides an annotation, and all you need to do is pass the item that you want to delete. So I can just say add delete, and we need to pass the item to delete, and room handles the rest for us. The next thing we need to do is we need to update the database. So for that, room provides another annotation called update. And again, just like delete, all we need to do is pass the updated user. And it uses, as it says here, it uses the primary key to match the entity. So just how I told you that you need a primary key to uniquely identify the row, as long as the primary key is same, it will always update the columns respectively. So function update. So now if I want to say update bottle, as long as I pass it with the primary key 0 and say I set its quantity to 4, it will update it automatically. And that's it for the database access object. We've defined all the 4 functions we need. And database entity is done, database access object is done. Now we need to create a room database class. Uh, this is basically we have, like as we mentioned, there were 3 layers. This way, this will define the room database class that lets the app interact with it to access the persisted data. Since we may have multiple user database access objects, the database class will combine all of them into one. So for that, again, we can see room provides annotations, and this time it's an abstract class. An abstract class means that you haven't provided, like some functions may need to be implemented. And again, since we're defining it as abstract and like annotating it with our database, Room automatically generates the code for us, and we don't have to do anything. So to do that, again, I'll go to File, new Kotlin class file, and um, I'll create a new class and I'll call it inventory database. And since Room made it abstract, I'll make it abstract. And now again, we need to annotate it with at database. So this tells Room that the Room compiler that this is the database class. We need to pass it entities. We need to pass it 2 things: entities and version. So entities are what all the identity, like entity classes we made. Like like over here we have inventory item. So we need to tell Room that this is one of the uh, entities we have. So now you can see the declaration. It says it's an array of classes. So we just need to pass it like list of whatever we have. So for that, I'll just create a blank list, and in that I can pass the class reference. And I can say inventory item, but now I need to make it a class reference. So I'll put 2 colons and class. Now this tells Room that we're talking about the inventory class. And the next thing we need to do is we need to pass it a version. Since this is the first version we're using, I'll pass 1. The reason we need to pass a version is because if, say, for later on, we want to add another field, like in add item, instead of like we have category, maybe we want to like add something like expiry date. So then our database will essentially get upgraded to a second version, and to provide like migrations, because some will not have expiry, some will, like the newer ones you're entering, will have an expiry. For that, we would need to provide migration code, which again Room provides methods for, but in our case we won't be doing any of that. But for, this is basically for later, like in case later on we want to pass an update and the user has an older version of the database, specifying a newer version will trigger the update database methods. Um, One thing, it also needs to inherit from the room database class. So do that right here. And then we need to declare the user database access objects here for us to be able to access later. So uh, all I need to do is abstract function invent. I'll name it inventory database access object, and I'll say that it returns an instance of inventory DAO. So now when I create an instance of the inventory database class, I can use the inventory DAO function to access the methods of inventory DAO, which were insert, get, all, delete, update. um, yeah, so that's it for the room setup as of now. Now we need to actually go into the app and start implementing things. So I've created a couple of to-dos here. And this is the remaining setup of the app with things like the recycler view to display all the items, etc. So we'll go into add item activity for now. Uh, I'll show you a glance at it. So we have a name text field, a category text field, and a quantity text field. Um, and once we click the add button, uh, we have the name, category, and quantity all ready for us. All we need to do is save it in the database. So now, what we need to do is we need to first get a reference to the inventory database class. So for that, Room has a built-in method, which I will use. So I can go back here and I can create an instance of the database. So it creates a room database. I have to pass it the application context, the class that we're using, and the database name. Mm. So the database reference is inventory database. So I need to pass that here, and I need to give the database a name. So a database is also a collection of tables. So it has its own separate name. And we can also just leave it as inventory for now. So now with the current state of our app, we have a database called inventory. And then this database can actually hold many tables, but in our case, it's just holding one table. So we have a table which is also called inventory, and the table will hold references to the primary key, name, category, and quantity. So that's the current state of our app. Now we have a reference to the database, and now we can call database methods. So now I can call db dot, and you can see inventory DAO, which is what we declared here. So now we have an instance of inventory DAO, and I can call any of these methods. So now since we're inserting an item, I can just say insert, inventory DAO dot insert, and I can create a new inventory item. So it requires an ID, but for now I can just pass 0. Room will automatically handle that for us. It will always auto increment, but since the Kotlin syntax requires us to pass the ID, I'll pass 0. But I can pass anything and Room will just ignore it and give the indexes on its own. The next thing we need to pass is the name, which I have a reference to here, category, and quantity. So now if I do this, room will insert this into the database. So we can actually give it a test. So I can say bottle and till, and I can say 3. But oh no, something happened. The app crashed. The reason the app crashed is because we actually did the insert call on the main thread. And this is not allowed by default because database operations are time consuming. So Android does not allow you to make these calls on the UI thread. The UI thread is what renders the UI and handles things like button clicks, etc. So now since I made the database call, a database call on the UI thread, it generally takes time, like like if you have lots of records, it could take more than a second. And if it takes more than a second, then your app UI could lag. So it's not allowed by default. So now what we need to do is we need to run the database operation on a separate thread. And to do that, Kotlin provides us coroutines. And for all, like what I need to do for that is just create a coroutine scope and pass. Um, coroutine. For doing that, I just need to launch a coroutine. And I can move the code there. Not launch. Okay, I'm having a bit trouble. So I'm not able to figure out how to launch a coroutine scope. So for that, I'm just going to Google how to do it. Yeah. So yeah. So this is all I need to do. This will launch it in a separate thread. And now we can check if the app works. And we can see the app successfully inserted it. Now to check, um, Android Studio actually provides us with something convenient called the database inspector. So if I launch the app in the debug mode, I can actually have a look at what the database is inside. So I'll run the app and I can see the database inspector, and it actually shows that we have a database inventory. Just now if I rerun the app, it should. Okay. Hmm. You can see we're running into an error here. So again, I'm just going to have a look at why the error is happening. Closed. So I'm just like explaining what my error is, and I can have a look at like some answers as to why. And I can see that even he is facing the same problem. So we can like look at some of the methods. Um, yeah, I'm not sure why that isn't working. Uh, Instead of using the database inspector for now, we can just try to display the items in the view instead of trying to run the database inspector. So we'll go back to main activity and we'll set the items from the database over here. So again, we'll need a reference to the database. So I'll just copy the code here as well. And it gets us the room database class. Now we need to get the items from the database and update it and display it on the screen. So for that, I just need to call db.inventory and get all. This gives us a list of all the items. But like before, we need to run this on a separate thread. So I can run it and get a list of items. And I'll assign it to this. And now to run this on the UI thread. So now what I'm doing here is I'm launching another coroutine scope and I'm fetching all the items from the database using previous methods. And once I get a list of items, I need to set those items on our adapter. Now, I can't set those items on the adapter since the adapter lives on the UI thread, and if I try to access it from another thread, it'll throw an error. So for that, I'm running inside the global scope. After this is done executing, it will switch to the UI thread and execute this code for me. So we can have a look at it now and see if our bottle is showing up. And you can see our bottle is in fact showing up. So that means our database is working. Let's just have a look at the database inspector to see if it works. Yeah, it's also working now. We can see the inventory database and we can see we declared an ID integer, name text, category text, quantity integer, ID being the primary key. Um, Now, just to make sure everything's working, we can add another item. Let's just say um, okay. Oh, that's because we haven't used a. Okay. Um, okay, so let's see what error we're running into. I'll just put anything for now. And you can see we ran into some red. It's going. Um, don't know why that's happening as of now. Till then, we can move on to updating the quantity. So whenever I click the increment or decrement button, the method over here gets called and it sends me the inventory item and the updated quantity that I need. So if it's 3, it will pass 4 here. If I click the plus button, if I click minus, it'll pass 2 and the inventory item. So now what I need to do is I need to call the database again, use the inventory dog and use the update method. And I need to pass the updated inventory item. So to use the updated inventory item, I can pass. I can use item, and since I need to update the quantity in item, I can use a Kotlin feature called dot copy, which will make a copy of the data class, but let me change whatever I want. So I can say make quantity, updated quantity, and keep everything else the same. Again, I need to run this on a different thread. So I'll move that code over here. And once this is done executing, I also need to update the list of items here. So for that, I'll just use the same code that I used here, which will get all the items again and set it on the adapter. So let's have a look. Okay, and we can see what the problem is. Dispatchers.main lets it run on the main thread. So this is also what the error was, that we were running into earlier also was. I was passing dot default when I should have been passing the main, which is the UI thread. So now if I add another item, it should work for us. Mm, okay. That's actually because of the primary key thing. We'll come to that at the end. So as of now, we're getting all the items, um, which is working fine, and we're able to update the quantity of our items as well. Now the last thing that's left is deleting an item. So the delete function is called when we long press an item and it removes it from the database entirely. So again, we need to do the same thing. Global scope dot launch. This will run it on a different thread, and I can just say db dot inventory do dot delete, and the delete is passed as a parameter here, so I can refer to it using item and pass it to the delete function. And again, I'll have to reset the items. So I'll do that right here inside the function. Yeah. So now even deleting should work. Now, if I long press this, it should get removed from the database, which it has. So I'll just re-add it. And you can see, and I can update the quantity as I want to. We were having trouble inserting an item because when we were inserting the item here, we ran into errors because I passed the primary key as 0 and room can't, uh, like if I pass 0 and I create another item, then I can't create two rows with the same primary key since the primary key was supposed to uniquely identify an item. So for that, let's have a look at what Room has to offer. Let's go to the overview and let's look at how we should insert. With primary. Okay. We'll quickly jump to the part that's for inserting. Have a look at the corner ones. And we can see that I forgot to pass the auto generate parameter. This will tell Room to automatically generate the primary key for us. And passing 0 wouldn't have been a problem then. Let's just have a look at if it works. And I'll start adding the items. And you can see now it's successfully worked, and we can increment or decrement the quantities as we want to. I also want to add anything else. Times. I can keep track of that as well. And we can also view everything using the database inspector. We can see all our columns are there. All our rows are there, bottle utilities, it's showing up on the database inspector. And with that, that concludes the app. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Today, not just about learning about room database and persistent library, uh, data persistence and room library, we also learned about how to handle errors well, and that it is a part of the dev process. Not just following tutorials and not just following code labs can get us through. We have to struggle a bit, but ultimately that's the fun part of dev. So with this, we conclude our session and all our sessions for Android Study Jam for that matter. Uh, if you made through all the sessions and all the units, big congratulations, first of all. Um, it is a lot of content to take in, given the little time. Also, that because of the evaluation schedules of our college. But still, I hope you have completed most of the units, and if you have not, you're still doing it. Whatever pace you are comfortable. So it's a request. Please try doing it by 10th because that will make you eligible for the reimbursement of the Associate Android Developer certification. And that certification is highly valued for freshers entering as Android developers. That the certification requires you to give an 8-hour long test that involves debugging, writing tests, or basically implementing everything you learned as an Android developer. Again, even in that process, like in real life situations of developing, you'll run into errors. You'll have to debug yourself, and there are for multiple tests you can take it in Kotlin and Java, both languages. And this Android Basics in Kotlin course is a pretty good foundation to start your prep with for that. You will be provided a study guide. We'll share the link of the certification details, or you can just simply Google Associate Android Developer certification, and uh, that link will have a study guide for the examination. But this particular course will give you enough base and enough understanding to start preparing for that, and there's only a little more you need to push yourself to get that certification, which is really worth having on your profile. That 8-hour long exam it usually has a fees 149 USDs, but if you complete this anniversary jam, which is getting all the badges on your Google developer profile before 10th of Jan, you will get you are eligible for the reimbursement of 120 USDs. Again, you have to finish the test, pass the test before 1st of March. Further details, I'll put about the AED depending upon how many people complete it and are interested in the certification course. I'll also float a Google form for feedback, and I'll also add an option to share your apps, whatever you have made, some random projects, or even if you follow the tutorials and maybe you want to share an app, we can provide you feedback on your code or in general. Or maybe you can always collaborate with each other working on apps. So another thing that I had mentioned, that if you submit one app, you have worked solving a real world problem. It could be a submission for on the behalf of our uh, our college and get featured by Google. And if you think you're not able to finish it before 10th, please make sure you finish it before 30th so that you can get the certificate of completion from GDSC Vitspani Hyderabad campus. For that certification, again, I'll be floating a form where you'll have to share a screenshot of your Google Developer profile that shows all the badges, all the 16 badges for the 6 units. And even if like not think about the badges and the certification or anything in general, Android app development is a great skill to have. You definitely should work for that. And from a lot of sources that I got to learn from, I personally feel this course is the most comprehensive and consolidated best place to learn from. And it's just not just tells you about the best coding practices, teaches how to write tests, and in general is a pretty comprehensive guide to get started and to even like make good enough apps by the end of the course. So you can work on startups, you can work on your own startup ideas, you can implement your ideas, take up projects to have on your resume, and you can also work on open source repositories like even Signal, the app we use a lot. Especially after that entire privacy thing came up. So if you want to start contributing to open source, if you want to get introduced to what Git and GitHub is, so you can find another video on our YouTube channel by Tanya Prasad, one of the GSOCers from 2018 batch of our Vitspani Hyderabad campus. And since GSOC and all other summer of code will be coming up soon, so it's a very good time to learn new development skills and apply it in the open source domain. So I hope you continue doing it. If you have not completed the unit so far, ask your doubts on our community Discord group, and please do stay connected on the Discord server even after the session. We'll try to have a community and discuss about things related to Android in general. Thank you so much for staying with us throughout.